Well, you guys, I just want to let you know this is going to be the best conversation ever because I woke up this morning with the song It's Going to Be a Good Day in my head. And when I met Dr. Jennifer Blossom, she played that for us at this conference and said, this is what I listen to on the daily with my kids to remind us that it's going to be a good day because God is with us. And so, what are the chances that that would be today that we're recording? So, I'm so excited to welcome you, Jennifer, to the podcast. You and I got to meet a couple months ago at an in-person event, but my audience may not know who Dr. Jennifer Blossom is. So tell us about who you are and like what are all the things you're juggling in this season of life and business?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It is such a cool thing to be able to meet women like you at events and on online and social media and just have this heart to have these conversations. So honored to be here. I am born and raised Alaskan, so I was there for a little over 30 years. About 5 years ago, we moved to Washington State, my husband and our two boys. So currently in this season, I am co-founding and co-building a pediatric practice just south of Seattle. So we do pediatric occupational and speech therapy, and then also an online and in-person leadership company where we really get into the hearts and organizations of corporate leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and just really tackle unmasked leadership. And so it's just my heart's mission to just help both children and adults tap into how God has made us to feel, to lead, and to love. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful gift in that.
Wow. It's so interesting because as I'm listening to you describe those two things, they sound like they could be totally different. And yet you just pulled it all together there, with that
Right.
teaching people to feel, to lead, and to love. And what literally the visual that I had in my mind when you were talking about these two different things was like, as a doctor, putting on your mask, and then as this leadership coach, helping people unmask, and just almost the irony of what that's like and all of that. So tell us a little bit more about your journey, specifically to the leadership side of things, because that's what I want to dive into. How did God bring you to this place where you're helping others to unmask? And we'll get more into what that means. But like, I want people to kind of hear, like, where's Jennifer been and why are you one who's equipped to do this?
Well, I feel like in my own life has brought me down to my knees in the darkest of seasons of being completely masked and completely numbed out on the inside. Well, ironically, on the outside, being the most successful we've ever been on paper. And so it was what I thought a really hard season in my life ended up actually being years and years and years and years of completely masking out, numbing out issues that were going on the inside. And so it was in that really dark season of losing complete touch with myself, with my faith, with decision making, and all of these things that we take for granted. I really was just rocked to my core and had well, no other option, but really my option was I need to get reintegrated with my faith, with understanding who he is, with his love and his purpose for my life. And so it was in that season of just complete despair of I have no other option, Jesus, but you. Rebuild me, reconstruct me, that he just took away all of these masks and helped me to understand fully who I was in him, and in that being able
Mhm.
to rebuild the foundation step by step by step by step. And it's amazing, Lisa. I was saying to a gal earlier this week of, when we're in that state of complete vulnerability is when we can find our power. And so it was in that where we were able to not only reconstruct, and I say me as in like a true partnership, right? Like it was not my own doing. It was through so much
Mhm.
prayer. It was through mentorship. It was through getting rebaptized. It was through therapy and counseling and, just a whole team of people and Heaven's Army that just really helped me get out of the stuck that I was in.
Yeah.
But the foundation we have now going forward is unlike anything before because it is kingdom focused and kingdom minded.
All I'm thinking is, but God, right?
But
Like, but God. If it
yes,
weren't for him, yeah, we'd still be in that place, right? And it would just
100%.
keep going down. And even for those of us, and I love that you said this, like on the outside, it looked like everything was amazing. Because I think
Right.
so often we see people, especially on social media, we see their highlight reels and it looks like, oh my gosh, she's got it all together. Things
Mhm.
are amazing in her life. Like, wow, like, we have no idea what's
Right.
going on inside, but God does.
Right.
And I love that he reaches out to us right where we are and redeems us. I mean, this is the theme of Redeem Her Time and just what
Yeah.
redemption is all about. And he can take
Right.
those places and
Right.
completely make them into something beautiful. So
Right.
I used to be a teacher, so I like to define terms, and I've heard you say this a couple of times. What do you mean by masking? You've mentioned a couple of words around that. So let's kind of go there and define that a little bit, and then we're going to dive into like why this is a tendency for us, especially as leaders and business owners and women,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we can find a million terms for that definition on Google, but in my
right?
own life, in
How
my
do
own
you
experience,
define it, right?
right, right. In my own journey, it is this facade, right? It's this mask that we put on that everything is going great on the outside, but there's this discongruence and this disconnect on the inside. And so it is this outward shell, if you will, that nothing is out of place, nothing is out of sync, or maybe it is, but not to the degree that is actually going on. And that's not to say that, we want to walk around with our emotions just flying everywhere, right? If there is this level of emotional responsibility, but it's the true disconnect of we're pretending to be somebody we're actually not, and not facing and not sitting and not walking through the stuff that we actually need to walk through. So it's hiding behind a facade.
So let me ask you a question.
Hmm.
Is this a knowing? Like, I know I'm hiding behind a facade, but I'm choosing to put on a face and a mask and things like that to not let other people see it? Or is it sometimes or often that we don't even see it ourselves?
I think that can be twofold. I think that, right, because when I was in this season, I knew something was off and I chose to continue to move forward. And there was also a million layers deeper of masks I had no idea about. So I think there's not a wrong or right answer to that question, which great question, by the way. I think it can go twofolds. I think there is a knowing and also an unknowing.
Hmm.
And there's not one answer for each person's different. And so it's embracing your own journey in that.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And it's not until you start
Right.
doing the work that you start going, oh, and oh, and oh,
Exactly.
as layer after layer comes off. I think about like, they often talk about like an onion, right? Those really
Right.
seemingly thin layers. And then you just keep getting down to the core. So
Right.
let's dive into this, right? Now that we kind of have a greater understanding of what it is. Why is this a tendency for leaders, especially my audience are Christian women business owners, right? So we are leading in a lot of different ways. We're leading ourselves, we're leading in our families, we're leading probably in our churches or communities, we're leading our businesses, like we're being looked up to, right? In some way, shape, or form. Why is masking or not recognizing the masks such a tendency or an issue for women, and especially in those situations?
Yeah, well, it's not talked about, right? We have this idea that society paints on leadership, and it's this super strong, super fierce woman, and she has it all together. And so we are inundated with this message that leadership is this way. And I want to preface too by saying we need to be emotionally resilient and emotionally aware leaders, right? It's not to say we want to show up to lead our teams at a complete disarray, right? We need to do our work over and over and over again, but we are painted and given this image that we're supposed to be fearless, unstoppable, and have zero feelings. And so in that picturesque painting of the perfect leader, right, we always fall short. And so we have these inner pressures, these inner dialogues, these inner narratives is how we are not showing up as quote unquote her. And so then we
Mhm.
just completely go for it 100%. We just whatever it takes, we try to get there to become her. And in the meantime, all these little unravelings are happening on the inside, and sometimes not even knowing it, right? Because we're so good about rolling up our sleeves, putting the rubber to the road and just getting to work because we're so used to doing that.
Yeah.
But in that we start to lose who we are along the way.
Yeah. And then I'm envisioning if the inside is cracked and crumbling, even if it looks like there's a hard shell on the outside, it takes just one little rock or one little thing to
Right.
probably like shatter everything because that inside is
Right.
so fragile.
Right. Yeah, it's like the dry bones, right? It's like this
Yeah.
shiny porcelain on the outside, but you crack it on the inside, it's a bunch of dry, dead bones.
Yeah.
And that representation was such an accurate picture of what my own life was, right? It was the super shiny outside, but one crack in that
Mm.
was just layers and layers and layers of dead, dry, work that needed to get done.
Yeah, yeah. So if you don't mind, I'd love to get specific. Like, what are some of the masks that we tend to wear and put on? Like, I want to get concrete because I want that woman listening. So, ladies, listen up right now.
Okay.
To be like, oh, okay, that's a mask. Didn't realize that. Oh, that's a mask.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wearing that because I think this awareness is, always the first step. And then we'll talk about kind of like, what do we do after we recognize, okay, I
Yeah.
got some.
Yeah, so some of the most comments, and whenever we're working, with teams or keynoting or wherever we're at, I always have like a little go-to pile of masks. And then obviously these are not end all be all. These are the most common that I see a lot of high achieving women struggle with. And that the first one is the people pleasing mask. And so this mask is very much how it sounds. It is the mask that we put on to get the approval, the validation, the good job, the whatever it is from other people. So we are just completely basing our intention, our drive, our whatever we're working towards for the validation of others. And underneath that is this gap and this void of worthiness, right? That's the bottom line of the story we're telling ourselves, is that we are basing our worthiness on other people's validation and praise. I mean, we go so much deeper in these masks, but when we're able to see where we're at and where we tend to mask and gravitate towards, that's the first step of awareness to be able to change that.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
people pleasing, that's a huge mask. We have the superwoman mask, and this is this is very common for women
I
leaders.
cannot
Um,
relate, just saying,
Right,
just
right, right. We cannot relate to this, but this is the mask that, she's got it all together. She's doing all the things, and we can do all the things, but to what degree, right? To what degree do we do all the things of, all the boxes? And I know, you with time too, just really um brings home to this, but to what degree do we say yes to all these things? What's going to suffer, right? And so you can check the boxes, and what else is gonna give? Because we can
Mm,
only do so much. So that Superwoman mask, we had the lone wolf mask. This mask is not super talked about because it's a relatively new concept, and I think that it is also provoking conversations that need to happen among women in leadership, and that is the idea that it's lonely at the quote unquote top. And it's like, first of all, like,
mm,
find what the top is, right? Do we have this hierarchical top and bottom? A. B, we don't have to lead alone. And so the lone wolf is the mask that makes you feel alone, that makes you feel on this isolated island, that makes you feel that you're doing this all by yourself because you feel like you have to, or it's all you know. And so it's this deep void inside of loneliness, of just almost like this soul and emotional nakedness. And it's a very hopeless, and it can be very helpless place to be, while also looking like you're kicking butt on the outside. And so you can see this discrepancy between all these fronts that we have on. Meanwhile, the needle's moving forward, the businesses are doing well, relationships seem like they're going well, but there's this artificial undercurrent that is happening, and it's causing us this internal friction that we're either A, running from, B, not facing, or C, we're so numbed out because we're so used to it that we're not paying any attention to it. And so that's why these conversations are so important, because when we have the awareness, we can begin the unmasking process.
wow, that was powerful. So people pleasing, superwoman, lone wolf are kind of like those top ones that,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, so
Yes.
here's my question. Because obviously these masks can be worn by, believers and non-believers alike, right? I think none of us are immune to these kinds of things. So I would love to just kind of dive into, like, as we go, okay, number one, maybe I have some awareness now around one or more, maybe all the above of these masks that are on. Well, how does the world approach things like this? And then,
Mm.
like, what's different about the way that you teach and the way that we as believers should now like address and approach this?
Yeah, I think the world approaches it as in just ignoring it, right? The world's going to tell us to push harder, to go faster, to be
Yeah.
better. And it's the scarcity mindset of we're never enough, we're never doing enough, we never have enough time, right? Now, this is like huge for you, for
Right.
time. It's like this scarcity of just run faster from it and ignore it. Or Or the other approach is a very secular approach of, okay, you have the awareness, and I want you to use all of your own strength to figure this out. And that was my problem too, Lisa, a while ago, is trying to think, okay, I have the awareness now, and I'm going to try to use my own strength to figure all of this out. And it always fell short. And so what is so unique for us in the Christian space is being able to work together, to co-work together with God in this, and really understanding his truth, his love, what he says about us, and getting very clear on the narratives and the lies that we have been telling ourselves, that we have been deceived by, that we have allowed doors to open by, that maybe have created strongholds and chains. And it's a whole thing, right? It's a whole inner webbing of gunk that now we need to face head on and get our spiritual armor on and start to
Mhm.
do the work. And so I think that's where society is really this double-edged sword of either numb out and run faster from it, but look good while you're doing it,
Right.
or muster up all by yourself and do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that you can do hard things, right? Which there's some
Right.
truth to it, but it's like because of Christ, I can do hard things, right? Like
Hmm.
it's not all in us. And I love that you have this approach because here at Redeem Her Time, we talk about having a with God life and what that looks like and what it looks like to, like you said, be in partnership with him. And here's the cool thing. It's not an equal partnership. It's not like 50-50. God does 50%, I do 50%. It's more like I don't know, we both give 100%, but his 100% is way bigger than my 100%. And
Right.
it turns out like in such a different way than if it was just me, right? So I want to kind of like pull this back, kind of get like this bigger picture, right, around our time, because here's the thing, I believe time is this underlying thing that relates to literally everything in our life, right? So let's talk about this. Like when we are masking, whether we're choosing to ignore it and just push harder, or whether we're trying to, muster up that strength on our own, what does that cost us on our time? Like, how does that affect our time, not only our time itself, but also like the outcome of our time and things like that? And then, like, okay, so now if we start doing this work that you're leading us towards, how does that like benefit us in that area?
Well, it costs us the quality of our life, right? Because as
Mm.
you know, like how we spend our time is how we spend our life. And so if we spend our time running from ourselves, running from our feelings, or spending so much of our cognitive energy, because that's a limited resource, trying to make sense of how we're feeling, why we feel so disconnected without seeking true biblical kingdom sound wisdom,
Mhm.
our time is depleted, right? And so when we spend our mental energy, our emotional energy, our cognitive energy, our physical energy, and I should say physical time, emotional time, spiritual, all these things, right?
Yeah.
Not in an effective, powerful way. It's a finite resource. It's limited in how we can effectively use it. And so it to answer your question, it diminishes the quality of our life. And the reverse is also true. So when we can learn to truly protect and honor that time space, mental space, physical space, emotional space, spiritual time space, all of that. That is where I believe we live in the overflow, the mental overflow of abundance, of truth, of excitement, of joy, of the fruits of the spirit, right? All
Mhm.
of these things. So it's how we are choosing to spend our time more so than just a linear, from 2 to
Mhm.
3 p.m. It is the quality of our time. And that is based on the quality of our thoughts and the quality of our emotions and the quality of our actions.
That's literally I was about to insert after you were done was like when it's all up to us, it's very linear. I do this, then I do this, then I do this, and there's this progression and this time like frame
Right,
that I have to follow with God because he's beyond time, right? He can compress
right,
time. He can like,
right,
take whatever time that is and like bring so much more out of it than if it
right,
was just us on our own.
right.
Wow, what a powerful thing. Okay,
So
so we've
good.
got some awareness around what masks are. We
Mhm.
have some personal awareness around one, two, or three masks that we might be wearing right now. So I would love for you to speak to that person listening who is like, okay, Jennifer, yep,
Mhm.
I'm ready to admit maybe I'm wearing a mask or a few, and probably more than just the three that you shared. What would be number one, what encouragement would you give her? Right? Because this is where I think we can shame ourselves and it can really then,
Sure.
spend time in a not healthy way. And then what would be like that next step? What would be like that? Okay, now that I have some level of awareness, what do I do with this? How do I take this
Right.
to God or whatever?
Right. Yeah, no, this is the step of, okay, I just cracked this egg and now what do I do with all this stuff? Like what do I do with all
I
this
got
stuff?
this mess and this gooey yolk all over my hands.
100%.
What, right? Yeah.
Right. And I always preface by saying like, this is part of the journey, right? The awareness is always the first step. And having that compassion over condemnation, having the
Mm,
conviction over the condemnation, because we don't want to sit here and beat ourselves up with the shame or with the guilt or with the condemnation, the condemnation. It is choosing to see this as an opportunity to go deeper, to work on stuff that hasn't been dealt with so that you can open up a greater, brighter, healthier future. We have to go back a little bit to clean this up so we can move forward with truth and abundance. And this journey is never over. And I
mm,
think that's important to mention too, is just because we start this unmasking journey doesn't mean we unmask and we're done. Like we're always on this journey of unmasking, of evolving, of becoming. And
mm.
so that's really important too, is to understand that. But what do we do with this practically? So we get quiet. We get quiet and we go within. The world will tell us to go outwards. I want us to go inwards. And so, what we can do practically with the masks that we talked about today is get your journal out. We have to spend time with ourselves, with our thoughts, with those conversations internally and up before we can move forward. And so, a great way to do that, to release this, to really go within, is to start writing it out. It needs to get out of our body, out of our mind, and onto paper. So if our listeners today can even write down the three masks we talked about today, the lone wolf, the superwoman, and the people pleaser, and see if any of those resonate with her listening today. And if they do, why? What ways have these masks shown up in your life? And allow the spirit just to really work through you, reveal the ways in which you might have been identifying or labeling yourself with these masks. How have they made you felt? How have they impacted your time? How have they impacted your relationships? And what do you want your life to look like moving forward in relationship with these masks? And so it's starting these conversations about, how have I worn these? What does this make me feel? How has it impacted my life? What would my life look like moving forward without this? And oftentimes it can feel a little bit naked. It can feel a little bit scary. But when we're able to see where we've been, we can maybe get a little glimpse of not even a year from now, but what would tomorrow look like if I didn't have this label on of I want to please everybody around me? And then what's one action step I can begin to anchor into that next step forward of releasing that mask. And this is a very podcast-ishy version of
Right.
unmasking, a very practical way to be able to notice, see a slight vision, do the work.
Mm.
Notice, see a slight vision, do the work over and over and over again.
Wow. Very powerful. Notice, see a vision, do the work, and then just
Mhm.
keep repeating the process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for walking us through that. And like you said, this is just a quick overview, right? As much as we can get to on a podcast. So, following up with that, then, so if somebody's listening, she's like, I don't just want the quick fix. I do really want to unmask. And, I want to know what Dr. Jennifer is doing and what this process really looks like. Where can people find you? What do you have to offer to help them get started? Like, kind of tell us where to go next for
Yeah.
those who want to do that. And we will link all that in the show notes.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I would say biggest part would be podcast land, right? So we have a podcast, the Blossom Leadership Podcast. Or you can just search Dr. Jennifer Blossom, and we have weekly episodes that just practically dive into all of these tools and strategies over on Instagram at Dr. Jennifer Blossom, and then drjenniferblossom.com as well. But that's where I would start. And just podcasts are such a great way to be able to do the work and get the info, and just have that weekly insight into steps that we can do to grow and to evolve.
Yeah. And you've got so many great resources, including a trip in Italy this time next year, which is so exciting talk about get away and do some deep work. Like, what an amazing place. I've seen the pictures. I've heard you talk about it. Like, God's going to have his hand all over that event. And I love it. So, well, thank
Yeah.
you so much. So one of the things I always do is we like to take it off the Redeemer Time podcast and start putting stuff into action. So I always pull out some kind of a community question from what it is that we're doing. So I think we're going to start with just that first step of noticing if one of these three masks resonates, because I think that's that first step. And I want listeners to hear you are not alone. Like, chances are most of us can relate to many of those. And so inside the Redeemer Time community, I'm going to give you an opportunity to be able to raise your hand. And this takes a little guts, probably. You had us do this and we were sitting in a conference room, and it was really, like it was a little bit to like put your hand up for the one you thought you were, but you looked around and you're like, oh goodness, I am not the only
Right,
one who is struggling with it.
right,
And there's power in
right.
that,
Yeah.
right? And then that's that first step of awareness. So we will make sure we'll take this conversation off the podcast into the Redeem Her Time community. So those of you who are not members yet, make sure you go to redeemhertime.com/community and come and join us. We talk about all things life, faith, business, time, how all of this works together with God and how we, yeah, really live out what we're called to in a busy and distracting world. So Dr. Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today, for blessing us with what God has poured into you, and for sharing such great insight and wisdom with us today.
Thank you for having me and for all of your work too of teaching us how to reconstruct and re-look at how we look at time and how we use time. So thank you for your work and thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, everyone.